Coming up, there is no more time for debate. Predictions are upon us as the Brooklyn Nets will take on the Philadelphia 76ers starting Saturday at 1 p.m. What will it take for Mikhail Bridges and the Nets to make some noise in the first round playoff series? We break it all down next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner and operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. And Doug, that's it, baby. It's playoff time. Enough with the nonsense. Let's talk predictions, expectations, and obviously you'll explain how the Brooklyn Nets will sweep the 76ers.
I don't think we're getting a sweep, but man, this is
balls in your court, buddy.
I like it. We'll go through how, the fan base is feeling here. Obviously, make some predictions for what could unfold in this series, just kind of where both of us are landing at this point. But on a high level, I will say, just as another reminder, I think, to everybody, and I think my overarching theme here is that having watched the play-in games, having watched how the season unfolded, having watched just sort of how things are going to move going forward, I still stand firmly in the camp of I'm so glad they're in the playoffs. I'm just so glad that this is the thing, because I know this was open to debate about where things could have gone following the KD and Kyrie trades, following the midseason blow up, following just this timeline of just heartbreak that the Nets have been on for seemingly 4 years now. In the end, as a fan, you want to root for your team as long as you can root for your team. Yeah. I think that is where I land on a high level. It's not a prediction. It's just a feeling that you want your team. The whole thing about sports is last as long as you can. Right? So stay in it as long as you can. And the Nets might be at the doorstep here of this is where the timeline runs out, but I'm just happy that we're not talking playing games. We're not talking lottery. We're not talking some of this other stuff, because this is watching the games is the most fun part.
Dude, listen, whenever it ends for your team that you root for, and I know it's I'd rather be dejected in agony if the Nets lose 4-0, 4-1, 4-2, whatever it is, than to have sat there for what could have been 4 games, 5 games, 6 games, and watch other teams play basketball. At 100%. There's never a time when you're going to convince me that not trying to win and not making the playoffs is the best way forward. And at a minimum, when we talk specifically about the Nets, they were never going to be, and you said this at the time, a team that was going to lose enough after the trade to have it have any type of value to the organization going forward. This is the best value. The best value is this group of players making the playoffs, going at it with Philadelphia. And listen, I know that the odds are lower than we would like them to be entering this series, but guess what? That's why you play the basketball games. That's why these playing games were absolutely bananas, and you couldn't tell if you were disgusted by some of the things you were seeing or elated by them. So I love it, dude. I think you're 100% right, and we'll start to dive in on what we think the Nets are capable of doing here. But, I think we said this coverage of how we broke down Philadelphia. Most of what we're doing today, I think, is saying, how does Brooklyn win these games? How does Brooklyn take control of what they can do in these games and make it hard for Philadelphia to walk out of here with an easy first-round victory?
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the key here is like making things difficult. The Nets are obviously huge underdogs here. Philly is minus 800 for the series. That I'm pretty sure that's the biggest playoff series number that there is. Over at our friends on FanDuel. Yeah. As of right now, oh no, I take that back. Celtics minus 1200 against the Hawks, and we're
Now
still
that we
waiting
got
on
those
some.
teams in, yeah.
And we're still waiting on some of these playing games, so we'll see what happens with like OKC and Mini and all these other teams. So it's going to change a little bit. Regardless, point being, Nets are massive underdogs in this series. They are one of the longest odds there is. That's for a reason. Philly's a really good team. Like they have really good team. They have probably the guy who's going to win the MVP. They have a superstar in Harden, even if he comes into the series a little banged up. And they just have a lot of really nice pieces that we've seen over the course of the season fit really well together. Like this is a group that fits well and it kind of on a certain level works. In terms of just like how they stop them, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the previous 3 days where we talk about Embiid specifically, we talk about Harden specifically, we talk about Maxey specifically. Got there
3 times,
it's all right. Because I think we did a good job of just kind of breaking down what each of those guys and the unique problems each of those guys bring. In terms of the Nets, like they have Mikhail Bridges and they have Nicholas Claxton and they have Spencer Dinwiddie and they have really good players. I think that those guys are going to present unique problems for the Sixers. But in general, it's worth noting here before we get into our predictions and everything else is that the Nets just on a mathematical level are big time underdogs here. Like for a reason. And these things over the course of 7 games tend to go kind of chalk, like in how they play out.
Yeah. And it's not funny, but it's I'm gonna say actually frustrating to be watching a team over these last, 28 games and feel like, man, I can see the areas that they can be successful in the grand scheme of things. We know they play close to 500. I think they can be better than a 500 team over the course of an 82 game season. But some of it to me comes down to just being like, how many times might we say over the course of this series, oh, boy, I bet if they had another 2 months to work together, they'd have that backdoor cut figured out, or they wouldn't miss that switching defensive assignment, right? Like those are the little things that I think we'll end up talking about a lot. Before we dive in on our predictions and a couple of key stats that I think we'll be able to look at over this series and say, these are the reasons why the Nets are winning or losing games. 75% of the time, Doug, the team that wins the first game of the series goes on to win the series. So really all it comes down to is winning game 1 on the road in Philadelphia. Just want to put that one out there as we dive in on what we think will ultimately happen here for Brooklyn.
All right, before we get to that, can I tell you about Nissan's most electric player of the week? It's brought to you by the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Aria. This one's going to be easy for us. It's going to be Mikhail Bridges. The key to the series here for the Nets, really giving the Sixers problem is going to be a budding superstar in Mikhail Bridges that they got back in the Kevin Durant trade. He's been easily their best player since that trade. He's taken an absolute leap. Electric, brilliantly fierce, fiercely elegant if you watch them play, stunningly powerful. We're going to see that on both the offensive and defensive ends for Mikhail Bridges as he pesters James Harden. Just some of the reasons Mikhail Bridges is setting up and is the Nissan's most electric player of the week. The 2023 Nissan Aria packs pin-to-your seat power and premium intelligence all in one EV. The all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Aria, the EV for people who love to drive. Shop now at nissanusa.com.
Okay, so I know that we could talk specifically about Mikhail Bridges and about Spencer Dinwiddie and Cam Johnson, and we're going to, but we kind of did highlight them when we had our conversations around James Harden. It was, how do you impact them defensively? It comes to some of those high-level guys. The one thing that we mentioned when we talked about the Harden matchup and saying, hey, Mikhail, we're going to put you on him, and it's going to be your job for 48 minutes to disrupt what James Harden wants to do. If that is the case, let's just go ahead. I'm going to jump to what feels like a secondary thing, but it's the most important thing. It is the perimeter shooting for this team if they want to have a chance to be able to overcome the 76ers. But that requires DFS, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, if he's going to be on the court, anybody else that you don't think are the elite core of this team, they need to serve their role. And if not, the expectations of this series are going to pivot pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think, look, on a very, very, very high level, the key to victory for the Nets here. They can do a lot of little things. They have to bomb threes and they have to make a ton of threes. That's really the one major path, right? To like them really giving the Sixers an incredibly hard time is they just have to take the one skill that they have a lot of guys who can do this on an above average rate, right? Like we know their 3-point shooters over the course of their career are very high level guys. This has to be the series that everything goes in. Like this, like for it to be really a problem. That is actually, people say it's a make and miss league and all this other stuff. Sometimes that is the whole thing. Is like they're gonna have to take a ton of these shots and they're gonna have to make them at a rate probably higher than they've been hitting them, and they have to do it over 7 games, like to be able to really, really cause the Sixers problems.
Yeah,
I will say that actually segues pretty well into what like the fan expectation here is, because okay, so the other day we put it out there to the fan base. We're like, hey, not a poll, but like, what's your expectation here? No subtext, no, leading you here. Like, I just want to know how the fan base, there was anything goes, right? What are your expectations? What would be considered a win and what can be considered disappointing? Because that's a spectrum, right? Like there's obviously getting to the next round is like the obvious thing, right? But if we're trying to work into like the realm of realistic, or we want to have a variety of different things that we can consider to be wins here, it was interesting how the fan base broke it down. I'm curious before we get to prediction, I'll just ask you what you would consider to be a W from this series. I'm just going to put this one out of the way. The coolest thing ever would be they sweep. The next coolest thing would be they beat them in a series. Maybe that's your thing. Like that could be it. I want to say that those are obvious. I do think this Nets team is on a part of the spectrum where that would be great. But I'd love to hear what other wins could be here, because like I think from an expectation setting standpoint, that is important to sort of do that.
Yes, no, 100%. So and listen, it maybe a lot like the fan base, like it lives on a spectrum for me. There are different versions of this series that can play out where I'm still satisfied. If the Nets win 1 game and are competitive in 2 to 3, in the other 3 games out of the 4 losses, if they're highly competitive in those, if it comes down to a 2-possession game in the final minute, I can be satisfied with that. Good for me, or what would feel like a win to the way you framed it. A win in this series to me for the Brooklyn Nets would be winning 2 games. If you win 2 games and play them tough as nails in 1 more, and that effectively means that by the end of a series that you lose 4-2, you look back on it and say, listen, did they have a real chance to win the series? Probably not. But man, they were a couple of threes away in that pivotal game from pushing it to a game 7, right? And really, when you look back historically in NBA, losing 4-2 in a series, there's a lot more there than just saying you lost 4 out of 6 games. And that's I think where I end up falling is if you can take 2 games off of Philadelphia, one of which may be the surprise in the first game, the opener of this series, just where you force Philadelphia to wake up a little bit and not look past you. If you could do that, that would be an absolute W for me. And I can live with a 1 victory series if you're talking about really going down to the wire in multiple games across the way.
And I think that mirrors the sentiment that I heard, in written form from a lot of folks out there. There's a lot of responses to this. There was a wide range, but kind of central core, right? Like, it ranged all the way up to like we sweep them or whatever, and disappointment is we got swept, and that's an obvious bell curve of where the expectation would be. But the meat of the middle of that curve really was around where you were saying is like play tough, don't get swept, win a couple games, really kind of show that you can stand toe to toe with this team that on paper is significantly more talented, right? Like they just are. That's facts. But stand toe to toe with them. And I'm going to add one more piece that a lot of people threw in, and I think, and I agree with this too, is that the expectation here is that you see Bridges and probably Claxton too show that there's like another level here that you can build toward the future on, which is to say part of playing them tough here is also a building block for like future playoff success can be built around some of the guys that they already have in the building,
Mhm.
right? Because like, if I'll tell you right now, they could go out and they could lose in 5 games. And if Bridges just like balls out in all those 5 games and is like a toe-to-toe scorer and bring it on the defensive end, and you're like, I would walk out with also a different feeling about the future too, right? It's like, yeah, it
Yes.
didn't work out. Okay, fine. But they have a piece here that is clearly a guy they can build around. He probably already is, but like, you know what I mean? And then Claxton too. And so I think there's like a range of these individual player outcomes that I think exist here as well.
That's probably actually a good way to fold into this as well, because the outcome of the series is one thing, but then the
Yes.
individual player, right? We're talking about a guy, Mikhail Bridges, who's on the edge of being a 30-point scorer over his tenure with the Brooklyn Nets since the trade. Confirm that you can do that on the biggest possible stage in playoff basketball, where, by the way, this could be the first time in his career that he is going to see the most aggressive, blitzing style of defense that he's seen, right? Where they're going to try to specifically say, let's take him off the board and then worry about, quote unquote, what else the Nets can try to do here, right? So Mikal Bridges confirming that to me is like, yeah, I can be that guy in a playoff series. 100% I agree with you there. Nicholas Claxton, he's taken all these steps throughout the course of the season. Go out and be a double-double guy here. And by the way, that can be 12 and 10. That can be 15 and 10. It doesn't have to be, this is a 20-point a game night for Nicholas Claxton, but just show that you can be a high-impact player. And frankly, show that you can, over 5, 6, 7 games, continue to go right back at the matchup with Joel Embiid and hold your ground in that. Like, it's a really good point by you to take the wins and losses off the table of this series and just say, I want to confirm that there are players, specifically those two, that can be building blocks. And I'll even add in Cam Johnson to that mix here, right? We know what this offseason could mean for Cam Johnson, for the Brooklyn Nets and that contract. Listen, it hasn't been perfect to this point, but you can go ahead here now in this playoff series and say, yes, but that level is there for me. And once I get more consistent and once you make adjustments to this roster, I'm going to be able to elevate my play a little bit more. There probably needs to be a couple games in this series where you go, oh, Cam Johnson can be that guy for this team. So maybe that, you know what? You've pivoted me a little bit in terms of expectations. It's mostly about individual players than it is about the results of the games or the series.
And by the way, I'm not going to take full credit for that. That's just like a sentiment I heard a lot. Like there was just a lot of people rang in with this kind of sentiment, which I hadn't really kind of considered, because I thought I knew what I was asking, but then I realized by leaving it open-ended, I maybe didn't know what I was asking, or didn't realize the range. Yeah, look, always a teacher, always a learner, excuse me, always both. So no, but like it actually brought a new light to me that I was not ready for either, but I'm totally here for also, is like, hey, this can be starting to see what the sum of the parts is going to be also, right? Because every team that is organically grown, and we're going to start calling this new version of the Nets, like it's going to be sort of more of a ground up build now, right? Like this is not Kyrie and KD walking through the door in free agency and this stuff where it's like, you know, monumental ground shift through the mechanism of free agency, which is getting harder and harder every year. Now, when you're on this next kind of timeline, which the Nets are on, you actually have to build on it in stages, right? It's not going to walk all the championships aren't going to walk all through the door. If you just look at how every team that's competing this year, that's good, they're all built on the timeline. Yeah. Right. They're not all built on free agency. None of them are really built on free agency. Every team's best player is, except for KD and Phoenix, honestly. Every other guy is like a homegrown talent for those teams. And so you have to walk through stages, and the Nets have reset the stages here to now walk on the player stage. They're in the player stage now. What do we have? Yeah. We have guys that can compete on this level consistently. Great. Let's check that box here in this series. Next year, we're going to build on, you know what I mean? And like, because we have to reset the expectations, and now we're resetting along those lines.
And it's funny to do that while going into the NBA playoffs, right? Not a lot of teams reset expectations on the fly, so to speak. Coming up here in a second, we will give our official predictions for the series, which will include, at least from yours truly, a couple more Brooklyn Nets players that I think can confirm their value to this franchise.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at Built. Looking for a delicious snack? Don't want all the sugar and all the calories. You need the best tasting protein bar ever. That is Built. You have to try it. You know, we've been getting Built for years now. It's the #1 snack to just keep you healthy, keep you on the go. Make sure you can reach and grab for something that not only is good for you, but also tastes great. 100% covered in 100% real dark chocolate. Real chocolate. You're not even going to believe it once you see the stats in these, but also the flavors: churro, peanut butter, brownie, cookies, and cream. They're not candy bars. They're actual protein bars that are good for you. Super healthy, 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, whopping 17 grams of protein. You can go to built.com to get them. You can also just go to Walmart, Sam's Club, get the specialty flavors that you want. You go online for the specialty ones, but those other stores have what you're looking for. Maybe you want to pick up a 4-bar box of the cookies and cream bar, the double chocolate, or the coconut puff. It's all there for you. Your options, they're super easy. Go to Sam's Club, grab them. Go to Walmart and grab them, or go to built.com.
Okay, this is it, Doug. There's nothing left to do here but give our official predictions for the 76ers against the Brooklyn Nets series. Kicks off on Saturday at 1 p.m. Doug and I are talking about. We're going to be watching it together almost 1,000%, and there's a chance we may be doing something a little bit different and exciting for the postgame. So be sure to be tuned in for that on all the great platforms, mainly YouTube. That's where you'll find us. But where I'll put the question to you, because I think out of the two of us, you are the more realistic. I think fans would call you more of the pessimistic. But what is your prediction for this series? Let's just go with the record-wise. There's still a couple players I want to touch on, but how do you see this series closing out?
Okay, I think that the Nets probably lose this in 5. I wish we had started with you, but
it's bad format, bad structure.
We'll bring it back. We did not discuss what our predictions were ahead of time. In retrospect, it makes sense to probably have you gone first. But look, I think that I'll use an analog here with the Giants this year in football, which you know very well. The Giants walked into the playoff game. There was like 2 versions of things that could happen here. It was like they go into the game against Minnesota and it's like, hey, it's like kind of a coin flip here and they could win. And then they get to the Eagles game and it's like, hey, this is house money. There's really, the expectations are pretty low here, or realistic. Their expectations are realistic here. And we can go out thinking this is a win, right? I think my prediction is going to be 5 games. They are out of this in 5 games. And that will not be disappointing to me if those other things that we talked about in the previous segment sort of get checked off, which I think they will, right? Like, I think that there's going to be some other check off moments here that are going to make it not feel like that is a terrible outcome. Even if me saying they lose in 5 games doesn't maybe feel so great in the old, feels category. So I want to caveat it with that, but I think from just like a betting angle, that's probably where I would put my money, and I would consider a sweep, but I want to hold out some positivity.
Yeah. By the way, Doug was really sweetening the pot there with that 5 games for this series.
I will say my gut was to say sweep. Just for a variety of reasons, but I want to hold out.
My gut
you're going to get a million YouTube comments about that, and so I'm trying to stem the tide a little bit there.
But of course, but a part of it is for me too. So just like quickly, Spencer Dinwiddie, like seeing him, I actually think one of the reasons why it's going to be fascinating to watch this series is Spencer Dinwiddie has done so much down the back end of this season to say, oh, he can be a valuable piece for this team. He's 30 years old. He's still on the timeline to be one of those veteran guys. And yet, if that other side of him, where he gets a little bit swallowed up by whether or not the fouls are getting called and whether or not it's heat check time or it's facilitator time, like he to me is actually a really big component of whether or not this team can be successful in this series. And success to me, we talked about expectations, but prediction-wise, if he's on point, along with Mikhail and the guys we talked about, along with Joe Harris, man, I want to predict Joe Harris just has a great series. Knocks down 3 out of 5 or 4 out of 7 when he has the opportunities for those looks on the court. I'm going with 4-2. That's lose. Let me just clarify that. It's not a 6-game roller here. I think they're going to lose the series. But I also think that Philadelphia, the team that has been the trust the process team for so many years, I don't think that this is the team that is going to the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't think that this is the team that's winning a championship. I actually think they're closer to needing to make some major adjustments to their roster than they are to bringing the band back together going into next season. So I think there's a little bit of that there. There's a little bit of weight of expectations for them. And if you believe what you hear from Mikhail Bridges, Spencer Dinwiddie, Cam Johnson, everybody, they're coming in, to your point, the Giants analogy. This house money, baby. And that means you get to come in and play loose and hopefully have 2 games in this series where everything's flown and it's going your way. What happens in the other 4? Listen, play them tough, be competitive, maybe have a bad bounce or 2 that we can really complain about on a post game. But I do think that this team is a little bit closer to being a true and dangerous 6 seed than maybe perception would tell you by the odds coming into this series.
And I'll add on to that. In terms of pressure, Philly has an enormous amount of pressure on them here.
Yes.
Like they have a ton and the Nets have no pressure on them here. Like that is important because, and maybe not something we've actually we've been more in the X's and O's piece of this than like sort of like the existential risk that the Sixers face here, which there is a real one. It's not like the guys that they have here are like some like playoff tested amazing group that has like multiple W's a notch in their belt. It's the opposite. This group has like, and maybe we should have led with this. This group has huge failures under their belt and a ton to prove.
Yes.
Embiid, look, he's had a lot of context in here. He's never like dominated a playoff series that I can tell, right? He's had injuries. He's had a lot of weird stuff that's happened. Break his face and all this other stuff and getting sick. Like he's had other stuff that's gotten weird for him. I mean, we're 2 years removed from them, or 3 years removed now. Like they lost to the Hawks that series, right? Like he wasn't the reason they went toe to the Raptors. That was like Jimmy Butler like years ago. Like we're pretty far removed from like these crazy Embiid playoff. Now he's great. And then Harden, his whole career is basically getting sort of like up to the point and then not really coming through when it really mattered. Doc Rivers has had massive failures with the Clippers for a multiple year stretch where they were like favorites to go far and didn't go places, right? So this guy, like the Sixers have a lot of pressure on them here. Harden could leave in the offseason. Like there's other stuff that's going on here behind the scenes that makes it that it works in the Nets' favor. Let me put it that way. Like this is like that really lines up for the Nets to take advantage because you win that first game. I'll tell you right now, there will be chicken little skies falling in Philly.
Oh yeah,
for sure. Like, and that's going to make the series fun as anything else. I hate rooting for other people's demise, but I do think that there's a part where the Nets can capitalize on like that piece of the pressure.
Oh, 100%. Right. Like this is like unrelated to the Brooklyn Nets. The Philadelphia 76ers are a 3 seed, but they still need to get through this round and then need to think about the very clear hierarchy of the Eastern Conference. It's not all 3 of them up there. It's Milwaukee, it's Boston, and it is narrowly behind, but most likely for the reasons you just mentioned, the Philadelphia 76ers, because they're not a team that has gone to the well multiple times or won a championship like Milwaukee has. They've actually been a perpetual come up short kind of team. And between PJ Tucker getting a little bit older, Tobias Harris is not the perfect model of player, like all these things. We start going to the laundry list of why Philadelphia is not good enough to beat the Brooklyn Nets. But I just think that there's enough there to make this a very exciting series, a fun series, and one that on the back end, we, and I think Nets fans too, will be incredibly proud as if we have real stakes in it. But I think we'll be proud of what the Brooklyn Nets accomplished over the course of the series and what it means for them going forward.
All right, buddy. I like that way. It's a good way to end it. Let's end it there on a positive note. Okay, we are going to get out of here. We will be coming live following Saturday's game in the afternoon. So make sure you're subscribed to YouTube. Adam and I possibly will be doing it live together. We'll watch the game together. We'll see how we're going to record. You'll find out when we're on YouTube. You have to subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube to be able to know. You get the alerts that we're going live. It'll be within minutes of the game ending. So make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Nets over at YouTube.
There's no quote, guys. I know. It's a pivot here. Just go out there and win. Brooklyn Nets basketball. Let's get after it.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets, Adam Armbrecht. We will be back again on Saturday following the game, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.